Welcome, 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 everyone. Glad you are joining me here on the last day of March, here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. We are going to have a conversation on Sunday afternoon. It is a great time to be alive. It is a great world to live in. Actually, there's a lot of bad things in the world, but I'm trying to be positive. Welcome. I'm glad you joined us. I'm glad you've made the decision to join us here on this lovely, lovely afternoon. It's a great time to be here. I love you all with all my heart. Glad you're here. So much to discuss. So much happening in the world. Shout out to all of you who are joining me. Let's make this a bigger conversation. Don't forget to tweet this out. Don't forget to invite people. Shout out to Miriam and Joe. Shout out to Tadas. All right? Who else is joining us today? This is going to be a great conversation. A lot to say. I will say it is awful weather today. It is just drizzling out there. The rain is just not making me happy today, but I have plenty, shout out to Jacob Maxey, plenty of the beverage that will not be named, the unnamed diet beverage, diet soda, a much taller glass than usual, and I'm ready to have a good conversation, right? Shout out to Owen Stevens, shout out to Kinky, longtime friend of the show, shout out to Stuart Becker. I'm glad you're joining us, Mr. Stuart Becker. Who else is joining us today? Lovely afternoon, isn't it? Shout out to Steve-O Awesome. Shout out to Jonathan Barker. Shout out to Casual Guy. I know you don't approve of my soda choice. I don't either. What else? What else is going on, folks? I've got a lot to talk about today. A lot of exciting things happening in the world. Shout out to David Willey. Shout out to Dan Ugo. Shout out to David Willey once again. Wow, so much that we can talk about today. Now, the first thing, shout out to Jason Dunn. The first thing I wanted to talk about today is I wanted to do something that is a beautiful part of the human experience. I wanted to complain about things that go on in everyday life, right? Why not, right? Complaining is part of the human experience, and there's nothing that two people like to do more than sit and complain about the problems in their lives. It's something we can all really, really enjoy. So I'm going to briefly complain about one nuisance that I believe gets on probably the majority of the people in this country's nerves. Robocalls. Robocalls. How often does your cell phone ring? It looks like it's a local number. It looks like it might even be somebody you know. Your phone rings, and it's a robocall, right? And some of these robocalls, they're trying to sell you something. Some of these robocalls, they're speaking in another language, and you don't understand what they're saying. And worse, some of these robocalls are very serious scams, right? Very serious scams people are facing, right? There's one robocall that goes around and it says, your social security number is being deleted unless you pay so much money. Call back this number and arrange a payment before you lose your social security number and it's revoked. You can't lose your social security number. That's like impossible under U.S. law. But how many elderly folks do we know who would get such a call and panic and call the number back and the person on the other end of the line, oh, it's fine, just send $10,000 to us right now. It's a scam. It's a ripoff, right? Or here's another favorite one. The FBI will soon be arresting you unless you pay this amount to us, and please call back this number and make, these are vicious scams. These are unwanted advertisements, and there's supposed to be a national do not call list to make sure this doesn't happen. But it keeps happening. Robocalls. They're very, 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 very annoying. Are they not? Sam Gittins agrees with me. Well, I opened, of all papers, the Rupert Murdoch-owned conservative Wall Street Journal to see this lovely article. Illegal robocalls go legally Illegal robocalls go largely unpunished. You read the article, it says that little money has been collected from the fines imposed by the FCC and the consumer protection agencies and others on these illegal robocallers. In fact, at this point, they have fined over $208.4 million. That's how much has been fined. However, only $6,790 has actually been collected. And the article goes on and says, well, the FCC and the FTC say there are challenges to collecting the penalties for robocall-related wrongdoing. Why? Small illegal operations can quickly close up shop and change their names, and enforcement officials say some are based overseas, making it difficult to seize assets. This is a public menace. The amount of times my cell phone rings every day in which it is not a real call. It is not someone wanting to speak to me. It is nothing related to me. It's a scam artist. It's advertising. It's annoying. It's very, very, very annoying. And this is another instance where we could use a government of action. Instead of trying to build a big giant wall on the border, instead of arresting young people for playing their music too loud or jumping a turnstile, why don't we have the police go after all these hoaxers and scammers and robocallers? That would be something great. I would like to see a federal crackdown on annoying robocalls. I would love that. I would love to see a crackdown on illegal robocalls. That would be excellent. You know, it's weird. You know, we see the police harassment, young people getting arrested for petty offenses, and, you know, someone gets a traffic ticket, but instead of getting a traffic ticket, they get taken to jail. And you know, some of us say we don't need, government enforcement. But frankly, every so often, I see an instance where government enforcement would actually be helpful. Now, these next two complaints that I have are very New York City specific. So those of you who don't live here in New York City, you don't have to deal with how annoying these things are. Public restrooms. If you're in Manhattan and you have to go to the bathroom, it's very, very difficult. Very difficult. Every restaurant, every coffee shop, every little corner store, their bathroom is conveniently out of order. And that's illegal under New York state law. New York state law stipulates that if you have seating in your restaurant or in your coffee shop, you must have a working restroom. But I swear, there are some of these Starbucks I've been into. I've been in this city since 2010. There are some Starbucks in this city that the entire time I have lived in this city, it has said out of order on their bathroom. Why? And they don't want homeless people. That's all it is. They're homeless proofing, right? They're afraid that if they have a bathroom, homeless people will come in and use the bathroom. I am not homeless. Neither are you. You and I are watching this together, and we ought to be able to go to the bathroom in downtown Manhattan and downtown New York City, right? I would like to see some enforcement of the bathroom regulation. I'd like to see a sting operation where somebody walks in to the Starbucks and says, "Can I use the bathroom?" And they say, "No, it's out of order." And they say, "Well, it's been out of order for the last 3 days, And they say, "Well, it's just been out of order." And then the SWAT team jumps in and they're like, "On the floor, everyone under arrest for not having a public restroom available." I'm just kidding. I don't really want to do that. I'm exaggerating, right? But seriously, it is very, very annoying that you cannot use the restroom, right? I mean, it's one thing to make you pay, make you buy something to use the restroom, but to simply not have, the public restroom available, very, very annoying. Another thing, New York City is the richest city in the entire world. It is the richest city in the entire world. This is the home of Wall Street. This is the home of the biggest financial institutions, the richest of the rich. And our subway system is a national disgrace. They have better subway systems in deeply poor developing countries in Africa, right? Our trains are grinding, slow, constantly late. Our subway stations smell like urine. It's unbelievable. I can't believe how bad the subway system is in New York City, and we are the richest country in the world. I went to Moscow. Amazing subways, right? Every 5 minutes there's another train all night long. Beautifully clean subways. It's amazing. Go to Beijing. Look at the subways they've got there. Amazing. Go to Pyongyang. Look at the subways they've got there. Amazing. Go to Indonesia. Go to Malaysia. It is unbelievable, the subway system that we have in New York City. How is it that we can be the richest city in the world and have a subway system that is grindingly slow, constantly having delays? You'll stand there waiting for 20 minutes. 20 minutes you'll be waiting for the train. And the whole time you're standing there, running late, waiting for your train to arrive, you're realizing not only are you going to be late because you're standing there, but when that train finally comes, it is going to be full of people. It is going to be packed. You are going to be standing room only. Why? Because everyone's been waiting, and the public has been piling into the train station waiting for that train. Oh my goodness. So there you go. I have complained. I have done the deeply human thing of complaining, right? I would like to see better subways in New York City. Perhaps we could hire the China Railway Corporation to do it. They make the fastest trains in the world. They're building beautiful train systems all over the developing world. I think that would be great. We need to fix the subway system. We need to have public restrooms available in Manhattan where people can go to the bathroom. And on top of that, we need to stop these robocalls. I am annoyed by robocalls. Now, somebody in the comments said I sound like Andy Rooney from 60 Minutes. Perhaps that's not my intention, but hey, why not complain a little bit, right? Right? But there you go. So I've given you my 3 big complaints, 2 of which are New York City centric, 1 of which is nationwide. Get rid of the robocalls. Let us use the public facilities, public restrooms, and get the trains to run at a decent rate. And New York City, I'm complaining about our subway system. Compare it to any other city in the country, right? It's that much better, right? Other cities in the country. I mean, I used to take public transportation in Cleveland. It was a joke. It was a joke, right? The train would come like once an hour, maybe twice an hour. It would stop at like 9 at night. It was ridiculous, right? You go to other cities. I mean, New York City, we've got a pretty bad public transportation system by global standards. But compared to the rest of the country, and it's like the shining best we've got. I mean, this is unbelievable. And it's part of the whole neoliberal lack of investment, lack of funding of anything that's considered to be public property, right? And we know that, right? Anything in the United States is considered to be public property, whether it's roads, whether it's water treatment facilities, whether it's power plants, all of a sudden gets defunded. We just don't have the money. Oh, the money's not there. Public budget, we continue paying off, these interest payments to banks, and there you go. Someone's saying America needs a new deal. I agree. We do need a new deal. We need massive amounts of public spending on infrastructure. We need things in the United States to get better. We need conditions to increase because this is unbelievably bad, right? It's frustrating. And I, as your common everyman, sitting here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, I am complaining about it. I am frustrated with the lack of decent public services in the United States of America at this time. I'm complaining about it. There you go. I did my complaining. You all got my complaining. If that was an Andy Rooney movement, you got it. So, that brings me to my next point. I say this with all sincerity. I mean what I'm about to say. I do. I mean it. I want every single person who's watching this right now to be a billionaire. That's right. I want you to be a billionaire. I want you to have the level of comfort in your life that billionaires currently have. I want you to not be afraid of losing your job, losing your home. I want you to have comfort in your life. I want you to have stability. I want you to have the peace of mind. I want you to have the safety and security, the comfort, the free time that a billionaire has, right? I want everyone watching this to live on the level of a billionaire. And I say that, I don't think that should be very debatable, right? Because compared to people 100 years ago, we're all billionaires, right? We all live the lifestyle that billionaires would have had 100 years ago. In fact, in some ways, we're richer than billionaires when it comes to technology. Billionaires wouldn't have been able to dream of being able to just pull out their phone and look up facts, right? That increasing the living standards, providing a higher level of material abundance to the population is a good thing. And I want your life to get better. And this is where I noticed that a lot of people who call themselves socialists are confused. The problem with capitalism is not wealth. The problem is poverty. Let me repeat this. The problem with capitalism is not wealth. The problem is poverty. Socialists want to increase the living standards for the people. They want people to become more comfortable, more wealthy. They want people to live a good lifestyle. They want the overall standard of living of the population to increase. They want technology to advance. They want a better life for all humanity. The problem is that there are very wealthy people in this world, but the problem isn't that they have wealth. That's not the problem. The problem is that they acquire their wealth by making other people poor. That's the problem. The problem with the ruling class, with the capitalists, with those who own the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power is not that they are wealthy. That is not the problem. If they were simply wealthy, whatever. The problem is that they acquire their wealth by making other people poor. Let me give you an example. Prescribe opioid medications. They tried to actually convince doctors and others that Opioids were not addictive, right? Talk about the payday lenders who prey on low-income people and get them even deeper in debt. They prey on their desperation. You can talk about the military contractors who see war as a money-making opportunity. You can talk about prisons for profit, GEO Group, right? The corporations that see locking people in jail as a way to make a lot of money, right? Wells Fargo is highly invested in that. You can talk about the fact that increasingly a number of corporations, instead of hiring people, just law-abiding citizens, paying them a decent wage, giving them a job, hiring them to do useful work, they are now hiring prisoners to do the work that was once done by citizens on the outside, and paying prisoners pennies an hour to do jobs that were once done by people on the outside who have, minimum wage protections and are not basically in slave conditions, are not prisoners, right? They're using involuntary servitude, convict labor, rather than the labor of the population. I'm talking about the giant multinational corporations that really have no loyalty to this country, no loyalty to you or to me. They're simply loyal to their profits. And the way that they get rich, the way that they become billionaires, these owners of major centers of economic power, of banks, factories, and industries, the way they become wealthy is by making other people poor. Their wealth comes at the expense of other people. And that is the problem, right? And there's this widespread perception in the United States that socialists, communists, Marxists want everyone to be poor. They think that wealth is the problem, that people are just, they like money too much, they like being economically comfortable too much, and we want everyone to not be greedy and share everything and join hands and sing Kumbaya. That's not the reality. I would like everyone watching this to have the lifestyle, the level of comfort, the level of security, the level of peace, the level of economic happiness, the level of material comfort that a billionaire has. I would like your standard of living to go up. That's what socialism is all about, right? And if you read Karl Marx's book, Capital, the point is that we have an economic system where human progress and material abundance leads to greater poverty. The more efficient the means of production become, the more efficient the factories are, the more efficient production is, the more advances are made in technology, the poorer people get. And that's a problem. And the only way to resolve it is that you need a government of action, a major center, a government of action to take control of the economy, the banks, factories, and industries, and force them to work in the interests of public good. And with human reason and rational thinking and science in control of the economy, not the chaos of the market, not every capitalist running around trying to make lots of money, not every man for himself, not the greed of the rich, but with human reason dictating economic activity and production. Human progress can greatly advance. We can set up a relationship with nature and with natural resources that's sustainable and long-term, right? We can solve the problem of climate change. We can increase living standards at the same time that we increase productivity. We could get down to a 3-hour work week. We could do all kinds of efficient things, advancing technology, advancing science, advancing human experience, if we simply got out of the profit motive. If profits and the desire of a small group of people to make money, the desire of owners to make money, was no longer the dictator of economic activity. If economic activity were subject to the control of a rational government representing the people and striving to advance human civilization, things would go much better. That's the message of socialism. That's what Karl Marx is arguing for in Capital. He's not arguing that people should be poor because money is not good. He's not arguing that we need to go back to nature and technology is bad and that humans have gone too far. Not at all. The socialist message is that the irrationality and the chaos of the market is holding back human progress. And the only way to really unleash human productivity, scientific thinking, creativity, the brilliance of human beings, the only way to allow humanity to speed forward, the only way to do that is by having the economy rationally controlled and no longer operated on the basis of profits. That's what socialism and Marxism is about. It is not a desire to make people poor. It is not simply contempt for wealth. It is not stoicism. Socialism is the idea that human progress can be unleashed. Now, shout out to Ronnie Miller. Shout out to everyone who's joining us. Shout out to a guy named Sam. A lot we can talk about. A lot we can talk about today. But I've noticed I've gotten a lot of socialists angry with me. Because there's this meme going around. I don't know if you want to call it a meme or it's just this thing you hear. Abolish billionaires. Abolish billionaires. I've heard it, right? A lot of the Ocasio-Cortez supporters are saying it. A lot of the kind of Bernie Sanders crowd is saying it. Lose that slogan. Lose it. Drop it. If you want to guarantee that the people of the United States will not listen to you, just keep saying abolish billionaires. Because nobody who has actually been poor glorifies poverty. Every working class person in the United States aspires to live the lifestyle that a billionaire has. Right? That is just the reality. People want to be more comfortable. People want their lives to get better. And the problem in the world is not wealth. The problem is poverty. And the problem is those who acquire their wealth at the expense of others, whose wealth creates poverty. Lose this slogan. Abolish billionaires. Lose it. Drop it. Forget it. Forget it. Right? I mean, think about it, right? If 100 years ago they had said, abolish billionaires, and that human living standards shouldn't go up anymore, none of us would be living the lifestyle we live today, because all of us live like billionaires lived 100 years ago, right? In terms of technology, in terms of life expectancy, right? All of us are billionaires by 1919 standards, right? Right? So forget it. This idea that we want people to be poor, or that wealth is itself the problem, or that some people are just too comfortable. This is a middle-class deviation. This is not Marxism. This is not socialism. This is middle-class stoicism. Drop it. Stop it. Stop it. Just stop saying abolish billionaires. You shouldn't say abolish billionaires. What you should say is that we want everyone in the world to live the kind of lifestyle, the level of safety, security, and material comfort that a billionaire currently has. Drop the abolish billionaire slogan. It is political suicide. Abolish billionaires is not working class politics. I'm just being real with you folks. Meditating Jesus says, can we imagine a world where communism and socialism did not exist? A world where they did not challenge capitalism? I don't quite understand your question, Meditating Jesus, but I do thank you for raising it and for giving us a super chat there. In a lot of ways, maybe this is what you're getting at. In a lot of ways, some people look at the world and they do rightly have a critique of it, that money seems to be all people care about. And that some people live in kind of the shallow pursuit of material pleasure, right? They watch movies that are full of sex and violence. They do drugs. They drink lots of alcohol. And that there's more to life than that, right? And that's true. And in every society in history, there has been what you could call a stoic trend of people who just feel that there's more to life than short material pleasures, that happiness can be gained through some kind of deeper meaning in the world. Nothing wrong with thinking that way. Now, often those who present those views encourage their followers to do very destructive things, like take hallucinogenic drugs, or self-mutilate, or starve themselves, or be more primitive and all that. And I'm obviously not in favor of that. I'm not in favor of any self-destructive behavior. However, this notion that there's more to life than money, that material comforts are not the only thing, that man cannot live by bread alone, right? That's a Christian phrase. Sure, nothing wrong with that sentiment. But that is not what socialism is about. And the idea that wealth itself is the problem is an illusion, and it's middle class, and no working class person, no person who's ever really experienced poverty believes that. Mother Teresa famously said, poverty is beautiful. Poverty is beautiful. That's demented. And that showed that she really had a very dangerous mindset, right? People not being able to get the health care they need is not good. People barely getting by, not being able to pay their rent, that's not good. People having short life expectancies. People spending their lives as illiterate because they don't have access to education. People not having access to clean drinking water. Poverty is not a beautiful thing, right? It is not a beautiful thing. And I will say we have a big problem in the United States because increasingly there are parts of the United States that are lowering and reaching almost third world conditions. Almost. Now, they're not there yet, and I don't want to belittle the hardships of people in the developing world. But one reality, and I've talked about this should be the scandal of the century. All over the country, they are unpaving roads. They're unpaving roads. I've talked about this before, it needs to be said. They are taking roads that used to be dirt, that used to be paved asphalt roads, and they have this machine, and they call it a reclaimer. They call it a reclaimer. That's the name of this construction machine that you can get, and it pulls up the asphalt on roads, pulverizes it, turns it into dirt, and spreads it, and where you used to have a paved road, you now have a dirt road. And all over the country, this is happening. Different municipalities are so in debt to banks, have such a decrease in their tax revenue, they cannot afford. Cities, municipalities, townships cannot afford to maintain paved roads. And so they are replacing what used to be paved roads with dirt roads. This is a scandal. This is a disaster. And this is happening all across the United States. It's happening in the South. It's happening in the Midwest. It's happening in Vermont. It's happening in Maine. Look this up. I didn't make this up. You can read about this. There are cities and municipalities all over the country that are unpaving their roads. And that is a disaster. That is an absolute disaster. If you think that we have an economic miracle, as Donald Trump said recently, you think that everything is fine and randy-dandy, tell me how it is that we as a country are replacing paved roads with dirt roads. That's a sign that we have a big, big problem. That neoliberalism, that free market ideology, Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman stuff that says, why do we need the government to pay for roads? If you want to drive on a road, why don't you go pay for it yourself? You just want a handout. That thinking, right? The Milton Friedman, Friedrich von Hayek, Ayn Rand, Ludwig von Mises view of the world, that free market capitalism, that, rational self-interest and greed is good, that mindset is leading to the destruction of the country. We are facing a disaster. Now, people talk about, asphalt and look, let's just be real here, right? When you're replacing paved roads with dirt roads, when you don't have functioning public transportation systems, when your water's not being properly purified, when power plants are in shambles, when they are closing hospitals, when they're closing schools, when your test scores are behind every other Western country, when the rate of suicide is rising, when the rate of heroin and opioid-related deaths is rising, you're having a big problem, right? We are seeing the controlled demolition of the U.S. middle class, neoliberalism, and the rise of these globalist financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, these international corporations that basically see all human beings as simply a financial calculation and basically see the world as their marketplace, have no loyalty to anything, whether it be this country, whether it be some religion, nothing. They are loyal only to their profits. The global capitalist system, imperialism, capitalism in its highest stage, as Lenin called it, is demolishing the United States right now. But yes, unemployment's low, as Donald Trump says. There's been a slight, 1% uptick in wages, right? And so there you go, right? But let's face the reality here. We are in a crisis in the Western world. And the policies of free market neoliberalism are destroying the country. And we are in a crisis, right? But I digress, as they say. I digress. So, I wanted to take things on a little bit of a lighter note. I noticed, the Conservative Political Action Conference that happens every year. There was a time in my life where I would watch it just so I could be familiar with the rhetoric. This year, the keynote speech came from Donald Trump. He gave a big, long speech. People piled in to see Trump. And Trump's speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference got a lot of attention. However, I made a point of listening to some of the other speeches from the Conservative Political Action Conference. I listened to Dennis Prager's speech. I listened to the speech by Glenn Beck, blast from the past, right? He used to be on Fox. Now he's just kind of on the internet, Glenn Beck. I listened to the speech by Laura Ingraham. That was one of the longer speeches. They gave her a full 20 minutes or so. And I noticed a level of confusion. It seems like the folks on the right and the Republican Party don't exactly know what they're about anymore. The Trump presidency has totally thrown them for a loop, right? Glenn Beck, he gave a speech that was kind of a rant against socialism and Marxism, but it wasn't very clear. It was rather confused. Its thesis was all over the place. There was a lot of, classic anti-communist cliches. There was a lot of, the Democrats are a bunch of communists, but what was he for? You listen to a Glenn Beck speech from the Obama era, it's very, very clear. This wasn't so clear. Dennis Prager got up. He listed, why the left is bad. They've ruined things. Laura Ingram's speech, though, struck me. Because, there's this saying. They say that the generals fight the last war. Have you ever heard that? The generals always fight the last war. And this points to a reality of the human condition, which is that, in reality, we all learn from our mistakes, right? When you make a mistake, and you become aware that you made the mistake, and you suffer the consequences of that mistake, that enables you to learn not to make that same mistake again. That's part of the human experience. So, as a result, they always say generals who are leading, wars, and wars are certainly situations where mistakes can have very, very heavy costs. Generals are always fighting the last war. And as I listened to Laura Ingraham, I listened to her presentation, it occurred to me that it seems like what's going on right now in U.S. politics, on both the left and the right, is that they are fighting the last war once again. The last time that society was in a major political crisis was in 1968, 1969. Right? And the left and the right both responded to the political crisis of 1968 and 1969. They both responded to it. The left and the right. But that was a completely different political crisis. First of all, there was a booming economy at the time. The U.S. economy was far, far more prosperous back then than it is now. Second of all, at that point, the majority of the planet was living under Marxist-Leninist governments. Communism was on the rise. It was a totally different situation. The USA was far more socially conservative back then than it is now. The left was really kind of almost fighting a culture war to fight for more social liberalism. It was a totally different situation. But that is the point of reference. For the people that are now running the government, for Trump, for Trump's advisors, for the people running the Democratic Party, this is the point of reference. The last time that there was a societal crisis of the level that we're at right now was 68, 69. And you had two responses. The next decade was really defined by that societal crisis, right? The next decade, the 70s, was basically, was two wings of the American political establishment responding to that crisis. Richard Nixon was the right-wing response to the crisis, and Jimmy Carter was the left-wing response to the crisis. That's basically what it was. And by the 80s, everything was back to normal. However, it's important to note that now, at this point, if you listen to Laura Ingraham's speech, she starts talking about the 70s, she starts talking about détente, she starts talking about the Carter administration and the oil embargo and fuel shortages, and you listen to her, and she's ranting against the Jimmy Carter administration, and she's pointing toward Nixon. Basically, she's pointing toward Trump, and she's hailing Trump for being almost Nixon-esque. We're basically seeing, in the face of a completely new crisis, in a face of completely new circumstances, the generals on both sides fighting the last war. They're having the Nixon-Carter fight, basically. Nixon and Carter never... they're the Nixon politics versus the Carter politics. That's kind of what the generals of our political establishment in the United States are doing right now. Right? And it's a little bit weird. You would think they would roll back to the Reagan years. They would roll back to the Clinton. No. There was no big crisis in the Reagan years. There was no big crisis during the Clinton presidency. The last time we were in a society-wide crisis, we had two responses to it. And now we see kind of a revival of what both sides think worked. And with Trump, it was blatantly obvious, right? Trump talked about being the law and order candidate. That's a quote That's Nixon, right? Trump talked about the silent majority. Again, that's Nixon. Trump very much, I mean, he had Roger Stone as his advisor. Trump very much, seemed to jump on the idea that he's the new Nixon. Meanwhile, with talk of the Green New Deal, with all kinds of stuff coming from the left side, we're seeing kind of a revival of Carter politics also, right? Jimmy Carter very famously, he got on television and he told Americans that they should not, instead of turning up the heat, they ought to wear a sweater. And we're seeing a revival of those two levels of politics. If you want to understand the perspective that Nixon really banked on, the sentiments that Nixon appealed to, go see or download or watch on the internet or however you want to watch it. Watch The Omega Man. Right? It's a 1970s movie. Charlton Heston, and it's based on this like vampire novel from the 50s. But if you watch it, it's very, very much, it articulates the Nixon supporters' mindset during the aftermath of the crisis of 1968-69. You got Charlton Heston, and he's the last human on Earth. And there's been some kind of nuclear disaster, and all the people are vampires, basically. All the people have been infected with this virus that makes them into crazy vampires. And they go around destroying things. And there's this cult of like crazy vampires running around the world, breaking things and destroying things. And Charlton Heston plays the last man on Earth, and he's there with his gun and his rifle, and he's hiding out from the vampires. And he's saying, I'm defending my little piece of property. And why do these people, they just destroy everything? These chaotic people out in the street causing problems. And, I have my little piece of property and it's safe. And why can't everyone just leave me alone? It was the rallying cry of the middle class. The middle class, the white middle class of the United States, the suburban white American saying, look, everything's fine. I've got a very high standard of living. Remember how it was before World War II and we were all, hungry on the streets? Now we have the highest standard of living in the world. So why don't all these civil rights marchers and anti-war activists just shut up? Just shut up. That's basically the message, right? The Nixon people. We're the silent majority. We're tired of the civil rights movement. We're tired of peace activists. We're tired of people bashing America. We want to just enjoy this high standard of living that we have coming out of the Second World War. And we want all these people that are complaining to just shut up and let us live our lives. Just shut up. That was the message. That's the Nixon mindset, right? And if you look at, that's Charlton Heston. He's just trying to live his life. He's the last man on Earth, and these people that are tearing things apart and want chaos are out in the streets protesting and making noise and breaking things, and he's furious about it, and he wants law and order, right? He's the silent majority. That's the Nixon mindset. That's the Nixon White House, and it was appealing to that sentiment. And it was this feeling that the left were out of control, their grievances were just made up and complaining, and no matter what, they just complain and whine, and they need to just shut up, and that let the silent majority enjoy the comforts of the booming economy of the United States. That was basically the mindset. But you have to remember that Nixon, in a lot of ways, there was big sections of the U.S. political establishment that were against him, right? I mean, first of all, he escalated the Vietnam War. He escalated it, but then he ultimately ended the Vietnam War. And ultimately, he's the only president we've ever had who resigned amid the Watergate scandal, right? And the press was against him. The Washington Post was against him. The New York Times was against him. I mean, if you looked at it, basically he came into office to try and be a right-wing strongman. He came in, he told the FBI to take the gloves off, just crush the civil rights movement, crush the Black Panthers and the black movement in the United States, crush the peace movement. He came in there, he lowered the voting age to 18, and he actually did a lot of stuff that almost seemed a little bit left on the surface, but it was all backed up with a kind of right-wing, rah-rah, get 'em, kill 'em. There were the May Day, or the Hard Hat riots in May of 1970, I believe, where these construction workers all over New York City just went around beating up hippies violently. Nixon was a right-winger, and he did a lot of things. I mean, he created OSHA, he created the Environmental Protection Agency. He even advocated at one point a basic, universal basic income. He was, in a lot of ways, he was a right-wing Bonapartist, and he was aligned with the FBI, and he was aligned with the Pentagon, right? He said he had a secret plan to win the Vietnam War. That secret plan was massive bombing, and he basically, told the Pentagon to take the gloves off and just, bomb North Vietnam like crazy. And ultimately, when that didn't work, then he ended up pulling out of Vietnam, right? And that was, that was the Nixon White House. It was right-wing Bonapartism. Right-wing Bonapartism. And it was very hateable. I mean, what he did to the civil rights movement, how he, allowed J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI to just brutally suppress the civil rights marchers and COINTELPRO. And, Nixon was pretty brutal in a lot of ways. And then in some ways, he presided over a lot of very progressive reforms that were made necessary in the hopes of creating social peace. He was trying to be a right-wing Bonapartist, and ultimately he had too much power. And he, he had an enemies list. He was suppressing other people within the political apparatus who didn't follow his agenda. He thought that they were getting in his way. Ultimately, Nixon was ousted. And when Nixon was ousted, you'll notice that was really when neoliberalism conquered the White House. It was the Gerald Ford presidency, the only president we've ever had in the United States, Gerald Ford, who nobody voted for. That's right, nobody in the United States voted for Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, he was replaced when Spiro Agnew, Nixon's vice president, resigned. He replaced him with Gerald Ford. And then when Nixon was out, Gerald Ford became the president. Gerald Ford was the only president in U.S. history that no one ever voted for. And his administration marked the beginning of neoliberalism, right? At that point, he brought to the White House Ayn Rand to accompany her little protege, Alan Greenspan, to get sworn in. That's how Alan Greenspan joined the U.S. government. The protege of Ayn Rand was brought into the White House after Nixon fell. You also got the beginning of Rumsfeld. You got Dick Cheney. All of them basically, they basically, that was the dawn of neoliberalism. And Gerald Ford, and it was a moment of political crisis in the United States for sure, but it was the end of Nixon's right-wing Bonapartism. You got neoliberalism, free market politics conquered the White House, and then you got Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter came in, and when Jimmy Carter came in, a lot of people want to remember him as just this nice guy liberal. And that's what he was up front. And this is what people don't seem to understand, is that the liberals, in a lot of ways, I know blackagendareport.com started referring to the liberals, the liberal wing of American capital, not like the Bernie Sanders supporters and the people who just want to help their country and believe in liberal things, but the liberal wing of the American establishment, the CIA, George Soros. Those folks are what you could call the more effective evil. That's Black Agenda Report. I didn't think of that. They're really the more effective evil. The Rockefeller family, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, the New England establishment, the folks who brought us George Soros, the folks who brought us Henry Kissinger, the folks who brought us Zbigniew Brzezinski, those folks are really the most effective evil. They are the most evil forces and the most effective evil forces in U.S. politics today. I'll just tell you that much, right? That your Republicans, they tend to represent the majority of capitalists who really just want to privatize things, make a lot of money, But the CIA, the New England establishment, those New England old money families, those folks are the most effective evil. That's Harvard, that's Yale, that's all these think tanks, that's the Council on Foreign Relations. You can call them the slow growth crowd. They started putting that out. Slow growth, right? We're just growing too fast, right? People's standard of living is increasing too much around the world. It's bad for the environment. Slow growth. Or maybe no growth. Maybe there's just too many people in the world. Maybe people just need to go back to being poor. Maybe that's the answer to the environmental. The slow growth crowd. Those folks are evil. They are maniacal. And, it was Zbigniew Brzezinski and the Carter administration that brought us Al-Qaeda. Right? And that story's been told a million times, but I'll tell it again. Right? The Soviet Union, on their border, they had a government in Afghanistan. And Zbigniew Brzezinski talked to Jimmy Carter about this brilliant idea he had called the Afghan trap. That's what he called it, the Afghan trap, where he would basically provoke a premature socialist revolution in Afghanistan by having the Afghan government brutally suppress the pro-Soviet, wing of the government, the People's Democratic Party, and basically force a pro-Soviet, kind of revolution to take place in Afghanistan. And then he went and he got Osama bin Laden, a wealthy young Saudi construction firm heir, to basically preside over an Islamic, I don't know if you want to call it Islamic or in the name of Islam, a jihadist insurgency against the pro-Soviet government in Afghanistan. And Brzezinski said he was going to give the Soviet Union its Vietnam. He saw the problems that we had in our 1968-1969 political crisis. He said he was going to give the Soviet Union its Vietnam. And that's what Brzezinski basically did, right? So Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all of that stuff, you can trace that back. The fact that Saudi Arabia suddenly is exporting Wahhabi ideology all over the world, the danger of radical Islam that people on the right like to yell about, jihadism, Wahhabism, Takfirism, Salafism, all that stuff, you can trace that back to, not the Republicans, to the Carter administration, right? And the Carter administration, they say, oh, that's the only president that never engaged in a war. No, the Carter administration engaged in probably plenty of wars. They were just covert. And to the world, Jimmy Carter was up there and he's like, I'm just a nice peanut farmer from Georgia. I like everybody. I'm friendly. I love all of you. I'm just a happy fella. I want to make peace with the world. I understand the concerns people. He seemed like the nicest guy ever. Remind you of Barack Obama? He seemed like the nicest guy ever. Meanwhile, you can go all through the world. He was doing this. He was engaged in covert operations that were sinister, right? I mean, he was doing all kinds of covert operations that were just maniacal and sinister. Meanwhile, right, he gave that famous speech, the Malaise speech, where, it seems that in America we don't judge a person by how much they do, but what they do, but by what they own. You watch it, and he's on TV basically telling Americans, you ought to put on a sweater instead of turning up the heat, right? Instead of trying to provide for everybody and make sure that people have a higher living standard, you should be poorer because that's the right thing to do, because I'm Jimmy Carter. This was Malthusianism in the White House, right? It was the Rockefellers and Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, and it was maniacal. It was truly maniacal, and it was a time where they had figured out how to basically divide the socialist countries of the world. That was Henry Kissinger's strategy, right? Henry Kissinger was a creation of the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers were funding him all along and supporting him, and they brought him up through the foreign policy schools and all of that. And Kissinger basically figured out how to play the Soviet Union and China against each other. And Henry Kissinger, and they had it down to, you read about this. Ethiopia. You read about what went on in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, you had this dictator, Haile Selassie, the U.S.-backed dictator who had ruled there. And then on top of that, lo and behold, then you have the rise of the pro-Soviet government, the Derg. And then you have the CIA covertly funding the Maoists in Eritrea to fight against the Derg. And this is the story of so many African countries, where the CIA basically figured out how to manipulate the different communist factions against each other. Talking about the Kampuchea War, where, Pol Pot, who was receiving covert U.S. support, is executing in Cambodia the pro-Soviet wing of his own Communist Party, and then the Vietnamese actually go in to try and protect their comrades from this crazy, bloodthirsty ultra-leftist Pol Pot, and then China invades Vietnam in order to protect Kampuchea, and they got the communists of the world killing each other, right? And they manipulated the differences. It was, you want to talk about more effective evil. It was this idea that we need to keep the world poor, that growth is the problem. There's too many people in the world. It was the dawn of the sinister wing of the environmental movement. It was the Carter administration. People make them out like they were just great people. They weren't. It was a drop in the standard of living domestically in the United States. There were economic problems, and there was a huge amount of manipulation and really sinister U.S. foreign policy. And the problem was, though, that the Pentagon was losing out. And ultimately, what happened was the Pentagon ousted Jimmy Carter. That's really what happened, is that Jimmy Carter, his covert operations, his Brzezinski stuff, all of that stuff was costing a lot of U.S. taxpayer money. But at the end of the day, it wasn't making a lot of profits for the weapons manufacturers, right? And the Pentagon and all of that, and the SALT Treaty, and you saw, retired generals taking out ads denouncing the SALT Treaty, and ultimately, this more effective evil that was coming from the White House was crashing the U.S. economy, and it was not making any money for the weapons manufacturers. Big wars are what make money for the Pentagon. They don't make money from the USA effectively, undermining economic growth around the world. That's not what works for them. So ultimately, you could say it was the Pentagon and kind of what you might call a middle class upsurge of the lower levels of capital, kind of like Trump. The lowest levels of capital teamed up with the Pentagon, teamed up with some more different factions in the administration, and they ultimately, the Reagan upsurge. You saw the removal of Jimmy Carter. And I mean, under Reagan, it was a right wing surge in the United States, but it was kind of an ousting of that. And so you got the liberal wing. The liberal wing of American politics is trying to go back to the Carter policies, right? Green New Deal, everyone be friendly, Mr. Nice Guy, covert operations around the world, CIA staged revolutions. Meanwhile, you've got the conservative wing trying to go back to Richard Nixon, strongman, FBI, Pentagon, bomb them into the Stone Age, the commies. That's basically what's going on. We're seeing kind of a reenactment of the 1970s. And the 1970s political crisis was completely different than the crisis we're facing now. We don't have a booming economy in the United States right now. We don't. Well, communism, or Marxism-Leninism, Soviet-style Marxism is not the opposition to the United States around the world at this point. Politics has drastically changed, but the generals, the people at the top, they're fighting the last war. This is their point of reference. That was the point I wanted to make. Sorry I took a long time to say it. What else? What's on people's minds? I saw a lot of comments there. Forgive that might have gotten a little rambly there, but, I'm just enjoying my lovely afternoon. I wanted to quickly mention, if anyone is watching this from Boston, from the city of Boston, from Massachusetts, I'm going to be there next weekend. I'm going to be speaking. There's going to be kind of a meetup at a church in Taunton, Massachusetts on Saturday evening, April 6th. And on April 7th, that's a Sunday, I'm actually going to be at the Center for Marxist Education in Cambridge, near Harvard University. And we're having 2 events, and it's going to be a lot of fun. There's some young people in the Students and Youth for a New America group. They're hosting me to give 2 presentations. The one will be in Taunton at a church in a suburb, and the other will be at the Center for Marxist Education in Cambridge. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm planning to give 2 pretty good talks, 2 kind of educational presentations, 2 very different audiences. It'll be pretty good. The event that we're having in Taunton is themed around Stop the War on Working Families. That'll be in the suburb in Taunton on Saturday. And then the event that we're having in Cambridge, near Harvard University, at the Center for Marxist Education, that's going to be themed around socialist heroism in our time. And it's going to be a great event. If you want to go, if you're a fan of what we do here on these lives, if you enjoy these presentations, you ought to come if you're in the Boston area. Got to meet other like-minded people. Join the fun. It's going to be a fun evening. You'll get to hear a presentation. You'll get to meet other people that are like-minded. It's going to be a great event. I know some of my friends here from New York City are coming up. I'm going to meet some folks from Boston. Shout out to Maddie, longtime activist in Boston. Shout out to Matthew, great guy Matthew, who's been really doing a lot to put these events together. Shout out to my friend Joe, who's actually going to be going up to Boston to promote these events and make sure that we have good attendance at them. Shout out to all kinds of people. It's going to be a great weekend coming up. April 6th and 7th, Boston area. I'm going to be there in the flesh. So if you're watching this, if you're one of the people watching this right now, and you're in the Boston area, make a point of being there, because it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun weekend. I'll be there, and we're gonna do some great stuff. We're going to have a great time there. So be sure to make it in Boston. Someone says Chomsky is a gatekeeper. Well, I don't know. Maybe he'll come to my event, and I can argue with him about that. I'm just kidding. I doubt he'll be there. But there you go. He's at MIT, which is just up the street. Boston's an interesting city. I'm looking forward to being there. I'm preparing 2, full-length presentations. I'm going to engage with the folks who come. It's going to be a good conversation. I hope you all can make it. But what else is on people's minds here? What else is happening in the world today? I see people texting all kinds of stuff about Noam Chomsky and about China and about environmentalism and blasphemy and all kinds of stuff. What's on people's minds? A lot going on in this world. I'm going to drink some more of this beverage. I did want to mention that, the U.S. State Department, and someone's shouting out, Marco is saying Belton Road. The U.S. government seems to be all out in trying to destroy Huawei technologies. And that's why this has got to be rather demoralizing. This was in the Wall Street Journal today. Huawei Technologies said its revenue rose 20% last year to about $107 billion, signaling that the U.S.-led campaign to block its networking technology hasn't curbed the company's overall growth. The Chinese tech giant on Friday also reported that its profits rose 25% in 2018 to $8.8 billion. All right? And I got to tell you right there, first of all, their campaign is not working. The U.S. government is doing everything it can all over the world to twist the arm of different countries and tell them they can't buy Huawei phones, they can't work with the Huawei Corporation. They've outlawed their phones here in the United States. They're doing everything they can to suppress this huge corporation, the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, something created by Deng Xiaoping, right? This Chinese national champion, this huge state-controlled mega corporation in China. It's not working. And it's not working. They've got the CFO, the chief financial officer, in Canada. She's been arrested. She's awaiting extradition to the United States, right? That's how hard they're going after this company. The daughter of the founder has been arrested at the request of U.S. officials. And it's not working. This is a super corporation. Huawei Technologies. It's not working, right? The socialist government of China has created this mechanism to ensure growth. They make better phones than the United States does. They offer better services to developing countries. And as much as U.S. leaders are trying to beat the podium and just say, no, you're not allowed to work with them, it's not working. And I was blown away by that. I mean, this is the weakness of U.S. leaders. They want to destroy Huawei Technologies. They don't like it. They want everyone to buy their phones from Apple, from Verizon. They want Android, American-made Android phone. They don't want people buying Huawei phones. And they have thrown everything at this corporation. It's not working, right? There's a level of weakness there that's very extreme. Wanted to mention that. What else is on people's minds? I wanted to mention that I've noticed that there is a fight going on around drilling, around oil and natural gas drilling, right? The Wall Street Journal's been talking to us about Colorado, the drilling regulations, about Trump's approval of the pipelines. And I wrote a book on this, Oil and the Global Capitalist Crisis, about the divide in the United States between big oil and little oil, right? We got the four super majors, ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, and Shell Oil. They run Wall Street. They're the huge banking institutions, HSBC Bank, Chase Bank. They're the rulers, the rulers of the world, the oil banking dynasties that rule the United States, the Gettys, just the financial rulers of the United States. And the fracking cowboys that they call them, the people like, Devon Energy, Noble Energy, the Koch brothers even started out as a rival of the big four supermajors. They've kind of been absorbed into kind of the ruling apparatus. But, this divide between big oil and little oil, that seems to define a lot of the Obama administration in particular. It was fracking companies and little oil companies that were really pushing the Tea Party and really fighting Obama. But Obama was in with BP, he was in with Shell Oil, he was in with ExxonMobil. And that really defined things. And it seems like Trump is trying to kind of create a truce, right? He had Rex Tillerson in his administration, Rex Tillerson of ExxonMobil, and that Trump is trying to bring about some kind of peace between the war. And now the oil prices are back up, right? The oil prices at this point are at $60 a barrel. And it's interesting. And I will say that I feel like Saudi Arabia and some of its desperation is related to that. Now, someone is saying, Dante Solano is sending me a super chat and saying, should we support, I don't even know what that word is. I don't want to mispronounce it. I don't know about that. I don't know about it. So, Dante, thanks for the super chat. I just don't know about that thing. If I knew about it, I could tell you whether we should support it or not. I just don't know what it is. I'm sorry. I plead ignorance. I plead the fifth. But look, folks, I'm going to make one kind of final point here. It's not a short point. And then I'm going to wrap up because it's a lovely Sunday afternoon. We've all got things to do. Here's the thing, right? That I talk about Marx and socialism and Marxism, but we're actually part of a much longer tradition, I would say, in the United States. And not in the United States, in the world. That those of us who want people to rise up out of poverty. Those of us who want a better life for human beings, those of us who want to advance human civilization, I would say we're part of a longer tradition. I made a talk about the fall of Rome, the fall of the Roman Empire, and I talked about Julius Caesar. And I talked about Julius Caesar as being the progressive in Roman society, right? The Roman society, you had your hedonists who just wanted to enjoy pleasure and basically carried out, the cruelty of war and the suppression of people and sadism and beating people down and enjoying pleasure and becoming more like animals. That was hedonism. And then you had the stoicism of the Stoic philosophers who starved themselves and whipped themselves and wanted more to life and said that great riches were not good and that people should live in poverty and that there's more meaning to life, and that you had the Stoic cults, the Stoicists on the one hand, and then on the other hand you had the hedonists, and that Julius Caesar represented the other trend. Julius Caesar represented the trend of historical progress. He was very much a city builder, right? Julius Caesar, he sent the unemployed proletarians throughout the Roman Empire to go and rebuild the cities that had been hurt, like Athens and Alexandria in Egypt. And, he built a library system, and he, freed all kinds of slaves, and he encouraged literacy and the ability of people to learn to read. And he wanted to bring into the empire, right, people throughout different regions, people in Gaul, people in different areas. He wanted to make them more part of the empire, make them citizens, give them a stake in maintaining the civilization that the Romans had built, rather than just living at the expense of these people throughout Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. Rather, bring them in, make them part of the project of the Roman Empire, advance human civilization. Julius Caesar was a progressive, and all throughout human history, you can see a trend of progressives, of people that are not hedonists. They don't want to just live for pleasure. They're not animals. They're not Stoics. They're not self-destructive. They're not mutilators. They're not, primitive mystics. They're not engaging in self-destructive behavior in the hope of finding truth. They're progressives. They want to move forward. Julius Caesar was the progressive of Rome, and when they killed Julius Caesar, that was the end of the Roman Republic, and ultimately that was why Rome as a civilization could not last. I mean, it lasted for a few more hundred years, but ultimately, the end of the Roman Republic and the death, the killing of the great progressive Julius Caesar marked the end of any progressivism in Rome, and made Rome a completely reactionary society, which it already was. And actually, I noticed that there was an interesting article here, Julius Caesar's campaign book. It actually talks about the book that Julius Caesar wrote, The Gallic Wars, talking about his military campaigns in Gaul, that basically sold him to the Roman public. It was the book that made him popular among average Romans. And they talk about how Julius Caesar, his use of language in the book was very effective. He described himself as a competent military leader. It even has a couple quotes from the book I thought were amusing. It talks about, Julius Caesar writes, in general, men willingly believe what they wish to be true, and that is totally true. Self-deceit is a big aspect of the human mind. We don't believe things we don't want to believe, right? He talks about things that are absent usually disturb people all the more. This article seems to confirm what Michael Parenti and others have said. They said Caesar didn't write for the political establishment or to answer his critics. It was the Roman public whom he wanted to win over. They say Caesar may have gone a little too far in his indulging of populist sentiments. His literary efforts didn't convince the Roman Senate, and they turned on him. Having laid the groundwork, he was able to count on the Roman people who supported him in the civil war that followed, right? Julius Caesar, the people who ultimately stabbed him to death in the Roman Senate were the richest of the rich. Julius Caesar was for the average Roman, and he was a city builder. He was for expanding and making the Roman project of civilization more sustainable, teaching people to read, opening public libraries, building, constructing, building up urban centers in different places. He was kind of like Alexander the Great in a lot of ways. And in a way, you can really go back, and I've brought this up before, and this may sound a little bit strange, but the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? One of the first civilizations was in Mesopotamia. And kind of the brilliant individual who was really the I don't know what you want to call him, the genius, the person who constructed the civilization of Mesopotamia was an individual named Gilgamesh. It was somebody who encouraged encouraged the people in Mesopotamia to build a civilization. And the tradition of bullfighting comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh. I bet you didn't know that. Bullfighting is obviously, people look at it now, they say this is cruelty to animals, but it actually had a symbolic purpose in Mesopotamia, because Gilgamesh was trying to explain to the people why they should go out and build a civilization, what made them different from animals. So he fought a bull, and that bull was bigger than he was. It was stronger than he was. But Gilgamesh used his human creativity, his intelligence, his ability to be strategic, to defeat the bull. The bull might be bigger, the bull might be stronger, but Gilgamesh, being a human being, possessed something that bull, that no other species, be it a bull, be it a cat, be it a dog, be it a spider, whatever it is, no other species on this planet has. Human creativity and intelligence. And it was Gilgamesh's ability as a mere human being to defeat the mighty bull that explained why it was that the civilization of Mesopotamia was possible. Right? And that's what bullfighting really represents. And that's why that tradition continues. It's Gilgamesh explaining, demonstrating to his people that it was possible to build a civilization. Right? Progressivism. The idea that human civilization can move forward and advance. That's really what we're continuing today. Marxism, capital, it's basically a continuation of that great tradition, of that belief that human beings can advance, that we can get beyond, primitivism, that we can advance, and that we need to unleash human creativity. Human beings have the ability to overcome hardship and get to a better world. And the way to do that is to really unleash the rational and intelligent side of human beings. And in a way, to kill the bull within ourselves. That part of us that is animalistic, that is destructive, that seeks only to live for pleasure, that harms others, that takes pleasure. We need to kill the bull within ourselves in order to advance. And if you're watching this live, you're listening to a brand of leftism and socialism. It's not the kind that you get on the campuses these days. It's not the kind you get from the Antifa forces. It's a unique brand. It is Marxism that is not tainted by the new left, the destructive new left that says that human progress is not good, that there is no truth, that postmodernism is the only answer. You are getting progressivism. You are getting the Marxism of city builders, the Marxism that turned Russia from being an impoverished agrarian society into being a global superpower, a world industrial center that ultimately was able to defeat the Nazis. You're listening to the brand of Marxism that took China from being the sick man of Asia and made it into a global superpower. You're listening to the brand of Marxism that told Americans during the 1930s that when they were hungry, don't starve, fight, and organized the hunger marches. You're listening to the brand of Marxism that took Cuba from being a deeply impoverished Caribbean island to being a country that's known all over the world for its achievements in terms of public health. You are listening to progressive Marxism, city builder Marxism. You are listening to something that's deeper, something that long predates Karl Marx. You're listening to Julius Caesar right now. You're listening to Gilgamesh right now. You're listening to Leonardo da Vinci right now. You are listening to Copernicus right now. You are listening to every voice in human society that says, I am not going to be an animal, and I'm not going to degrade myself, but instead, I am going to find the rational part of my mind. I am going to find what makes me a human being, which separates me from being an animal, and I'm going to march forward into the future. That's what you're hearing right now. This is a long tradition. This is empathy, sure. This is also rational thinking. This is science and reason. You are hearing the only thing that has allowed human beings to get from caves and hunter-gatherer civilization up to where we are today. You are listening to human progress. And we live in a world where there are so many forces that no longer believe in the progress of human beings. They don't believe it's possible to march forward. Well, I believe in the human species. I believe that we can advance. I believe that there's something higher within us, that we have the ability to march forward. We have a light within. We have a rational mind We have something that gives us the ability to improve our lives and improve living conditions. The long march of humanity is continuing, and that's what you're listening to on these lives. The heroic side of the human being. The part that is capable of overcoming its own direct material interests and advancing. The ability to live for a higher ideal and something better than yourself. That's what you're listening to on these lives. And that's what you're reading if you buy a copy of my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. And that's what you're helping when you spread the message here. We are part of a project to rescue humanity from its own self-destructive instincts, to emphasize and celebrate the human part of human beings, the humanity within us all, the creativity, the spark of life that gave us the ability to not be like animals, but to create civilizations and create technology and really build a better life, the ability of human beings to collectively work in their own interest as a species. That's what you're listening to in these lives. So I hope that you'll help spread the message. I hope you'll stay alive. I hope you'll still be part of this. We need more people involved because the destructive right, the destructive left, neither of them are going to save us. Only progressivism and forward-thinking progress, the idea of getting beyond capitalism, rationally organizing the economy, that's the only hope we have as a species. And you, because you're watching this, are part of a great project. We can get beyond the disaster. We can get beyond the low-wage police state. We can get beyond the danger of a new war. We can get beyond a society where people have no attachment to each other. We can get to a higher stage of human progress and human civilization. Right? And you're here, you're part of this. You may not be saying anything. You may be a lurker. You may be a hater. You may be a fan. You're part of this, whether you like it or not. And we are going to get out of the rut that the human species is in, and we are going to create a new global renaissance, a reawakening of the human spirit. I believe in you, you believe in me, and we're in this together. And on that note, I'm signing off. Have a good week. April's coming, but today is the last day of March. All my best wishes to all of you. I love you with all my heart. Stay strong. Think about the fist. Right? Why do Marxists salute each other with the fist? Where does that come from? Where does that come from, the fist? It comes from the fact that in the Paris Commune, the first proletarian uprising, the first time where the working class seized control of a city, the Paris Commune, it was defeated. And when it was defeated, they lined up many of the revolutionaries and the workers that had seized control of Paris, and they shot them. But as they were being shot, they had their fists like this. And then, when their bodies were dumped into shallow graves, something called rigorous mortima took effect. Right? And that's, as after you're dead, your body stiffens. And so, at that point, the executioners of the Paris communards, they looked on in horror as person after person, body after body, fists came up from the ground. The fist stands for the immortality of the human spirit. It stands for the fact that even in death, we keep marching. No matter what sacrifices we make, no matter how hard it gets, the human spirit cannot be killed. The fist stands for the fist of that corpse of the Paris Communard rising from the dirt. The immortality of the struggle of human beings for a better life and for better conditions. That's what the fist stands for. That's why communists salute themselves with a fist. The fist rising up from the ground. The immortality of human progress. And the never surrenderedness, the dedication, and the will to keep going in the face of hardship that has driven human history forward. It's the will, the grit, and the sacrifice of those who believe in a better world and are willing to do what's necessary to make it come into being. That's where the fist comes from. The fist stands for you, it stands for me, it stands for all of us. We're going to get out of this rut that the human race is in. We're going to become the city builders of the 21st century. That's what's going to happen.